Peter.
Peter Conlon.
Brittany Gelman, Business Manager. Peg Martin.
Victoria Jetty.
Peter Burrows.
Jory.
Superintendent.
Dory Jacobite.
Lorraine.
Lorraine Morse.
Suzanne. Dan Buck. Great. That's Suzanne. Why don't also at this time we share anyone who's joined us remotely?
Okay, we have Barb Wilson, Eric Boir, Hugh McLaughlin, MCTV has joined us, Ruth Bernstein, Tanya Scuteri, and Will Amidon.
Great. And we have one more person joining us who will share their name as well.
Hello, I'm Henry Carpenter,
Great,
student
thank you.
representative.
Thanks, Henry. And as always, we like to start these off with the opportunity for public comment. For our folks who are participating via Zoom, if you could just raise your Zoom hand, and then Peter will let you in as a presenter and share your public comment.
Okay, Barb Wilson. Okay, Barb, you're live.
Okay, I see I had to unmute myself. Thank you for letting me give comments. Just a couple things. First, I wanted to offer some information. Over the summer, we did a survey, and we didn't have an opportunity to do all of the summarization of that survey until just recently. But one of the things that really jumped out was the fact that in Shoreham, the fact that our enrollment has been going up is really a phenomenon that's happened over the last 12 years. We presented questions asking, when people moved into town, as well as whether they have children or of age where they might have children. And a wide percentage of folks actually have moved into Shoreham since 2012. At that point, if you look at an average between then and now, it's like 3.5 families per year. If you look at 8 years, it's actually higher, which is 4, an average of 4 families per year. And if you only look at the last 4 years, it's actually 5. So it's been a building type of thing. And the reason I bring this up back pre-COVID days, I had indicated that, that Shoreham, the reason that our enrollment is growing is because it is a little less expensive, and folks actually did confirm that. There was questions asking what were the high reasons why they moved to Shoreham, one of which was an elementary school within 5 to 6 miles of their home, and the other one was the affordability, being able to buy the size of house with a little land that they need in order to raise a family. So it was something that I had mentioned earlier and didn't have, it was more anecdotal, my gut, but this is what the survey responses showed. We got a very high percentage of the parents who have children in the school, and even community members responding. We had a 34% response rate across the entire town, and 60% of the parents who have kids within the school. And unfortunately, the ones that we didn't get are those of the lowest income strata that qualify for free lunch, reduced lunch. Those were the ones mostly that were missing, because there was a question related to that. So it does bring up another question, is because the most recent numbers that Brittany included with the agenda shows higher numbers still again in Shoreham. And I'm wondering now, as we're doing the transportation study, are we using the numbers from a previous year, which would be 10 less than we have now if you eliminated 6th grade in our analysis? So that would be one thing, maybe during the facilities discussion, it'd be interesting to hear. So I just thought I would throw that out. And we're in the process of finalizing the summarization of the survey. And I would be happy once it's done to share it with the board, because I think, you know, we had a lot of questions on there, and people really took the time, you know, to really respond thoroughly and even write in a lot of comments. So I think it would be very interesting, you know, for you to have a copy as well.
Great, thanks, Barb.
Okay, we have Will Amadon here. Coming over now.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I will.
Great. Oh, and I'll turn on my video too. So my name's Will Amadon. I'm a Cornwall resident, two young kids here. And first, I just want to say thank you to all of you for the service. Seeing you in the room, it reminds me how hard you're working. And honestly, I am humbled by the hours you guys put in to do this work and guide us through this. So thank you. But I also want to just briefly touch on a few reasons why I'm troubled by the facilities master plan. About a year ago, I was really in favor of school consolidation. I thought, what a great opportunity to get bigger classes and get more resources for our students, you know, whether it's special, you know, students who need special resources, or whether it's enrichment type stuff. And I've really just want to share that I've been turned off by the process to the point that I'm really in the opposition camp now. And I thought it was worth sharing why that was. And, you know, one reason is I've just felt that the messaging around this, I came to it late. I started really digging in a couple months ago. And I've seen a lot of messaging around facilities, around, you know, the need to implement IB, things like that, which have in the end seemed like a smokescreen to me around this really central issue, which is a 10% budget cut. And, you know, the front porch discussions I've gone to, it hasn't really been presented as, hey, we're aiming for a 10% budget cut. You know, let's work together to do this. It's been more presented in these other pretenses. And that unfortunately has led me to, I guess I would say, distrust or skepticism around the process. And I know it's been going on for years, but as a latecomer to the process, I don't see it being led with education. I don't see it being led with student interests at heart. And, you know, to the point that the communities are being asked to accept, these closures, you know, probably without any real understanding of what the curriculum on the other side of this looks like. And so it's really a trust issue. It's like, hey, trust us. We're going to get to a good curriculum on the other side of this, but give us your school first, you know, and it really puts me on the defensive quite a lot. And so that's one point. The other point is just, I have a hard time understanding where the mandate comes from. You know, I understand we're trying to get a 10% budget cut, but I don't understand where that originates. And I know that we are over threshold spending this last year and finances are tight, but when I look around the community, I see support for our schools, and I see the voices I hear, the poll results I hear are all very skeptical or against school closure. And I suspect that there's a big part of this community that's willing to continue to fund and resource these schools. So it makes me wonder, where is the mandate coming from? Where is this mission originating? And when I wonder that, it makes me wonder also, where does it end, right? When I don't see a clear mandate, I don't understand where the bottom line is for you guys. And that, it makes me nervous. And the final thing I'll just point out is the timeline. You know, I think the other thing that's made me very uneasy about the process is this accelerated timeline. I know it's been a 2-year process, but a lot of us came to the table when we realized our schools were closing. And that was not that long ago. And I think we don't even have a clear picture of the curriculum at this point, but yet you want to finalize this in less than 4 months. And so again, to me, it just doesn't jive. It seems like there's this kind of race to the finish line that doesn't necessarily permit a lot of robust community engagement at this critical juncture in the process. And that makes me very uncomfortable as well. And I think I'll leave it there, other than to just say that something you guys all know, which is that, you know, education spending is expensive because it involves people, but also these are the most vulnerable people in our community. These are people who are employed in our community. And essentially one way we can view education funding is as a, you know, a social service, right? It's something we give to our community to keep it strong, keep it healthy and vibrant. And I'm very concerned about taking cuts to it at this difficult time. So thank you all for listening to my speech. I hope it wasn't too high and mighty, because I know you guys know all of this stuff, but thank you for being here, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate it.
Okay, that looks like that's it. Is anyone else there?
All good?
Yep.
Great. Next on the agenda is to approve our bills.
I gotta go to minutes. I'll move that we approve the minutes.
Oh,
Minutes is next.
sorry. Next on our agenda is to approve the minutes. Why don't we do that one first? Motion to approve the minutes from October 12th. Peter's
moved.
first, so moved by Chip for second. Any discussion on the minutes?
Just
Yeah,
a quick note that I was not, it lists me as present and I wasn't.
Okay,
I abstained. I was not here.
okay. So approved with a fix of attendees. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? One abstain. Okay, two abstain. Two abstain.
Is Suzanne, are you going to change the attendees and let Sharon know?
You're muted.
I couldn't hear who said they weren't there, who was wrong, so
Anita Glassions was not there.
who?
I think she's on it though. Yeah.
Mary wasn't there?
Amy was
Amy.
not there.
Amy wasn't there.
And Peg.
You gotta think she's on
But
it.
you're listed.
You're listed as
I'm
not.
noted on the minutes.
All set?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Next up, what I was in such a rush to get to, approving the bill.
One set of bills since last meeting that we read today, again by myself and presumably Victoria.
Yep.
And it's a total number of $256,717.64. These are all general fund bills. I move we pay the bills. I will say it's 14 pages of listing things here, because we have to list every little thing on every little credit card and the multiple different things. It's in some ways it's easier to read them remotely because we don't have the stack of documentation we have to go through. But you know, when you have 75 entries on the Amazon credit card or whatever, it's quite amazing. Anyway, I move we pay the bills.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So moved. Next up, report of the superintendent.
Great, thank you. So last meeting, we were going to present our enrollment numbers. We wanted to do a final pass and work on a couple things. So we do now have an enrollment update to present all of you with. It's something we've been talking about a lot, I think, in the context of the facilities master plan. It's something we've been talking a lot about at the state level. As superintendents were at the beginning of this year wrestling with the challenges of the pandemic and potential changes in ADM. Folks may know that we have a kind of a quote unquote hold harmless for this year, meaning our ADM number can't go down. that our equalized pupil number will probably still will be different, but any impact on enrollment is absorbed. Any increase from last year, we will receive. So that was a positive for us going into FY22. Will's got a presentation, just a few slides, if you could open that up.
So I'll share my screen. Is that-
Yep. So we just got a few slides just to show historically where things are. I'll let Brittany kind of walk through. She put these slides together, let her walk through the data, and then we can answer questions that you may have.
Okay, so in your board pack, there is a detailed breakdown of student enrollment. We take it in September of each year, so I provided this year and last year just for comparison. And then I also provided our current and then our projected for next year and the breakdown by school. When we look at total enrollment historically, we tend to look at K-12 rather than pre-K-12 just because it's varied which schools have provided pre-K. Some years they have, some years they haven't. And up until a few years ago, Mary Hogan's pre-K program was kind of considered a standalone. So it's so variable that we try to just look at K-12 for more consistency. Okay. So the first slide, I guess I should have.
Can't see.
Yeah.
This one. This was on board pack?
The slides are not on board pack, but the documents that I referred to with the detailed breakdown are on board pack.
Oh, I missed them.
I missed it too, actually.
They were added today, so.
Okay.
That's right. Okay, so the first slide, the next slide, just kind of wanted to show like over time, looking back to 2000 and then through to 25, just sort of wanted to provide some context like at a macro level of, where we were at, somewhat of a high point. So, we were over 2,200 students at that time. And we have lost, since 2018, we saw like a brief uptick and then a decline. But we're expecting to see that decline somewhat level off starting in FY25, FY26. We have a couple of somewhat large cohorts that will be graduating. We have a 162 at the high school that is going to be graduating, and then a 140. Once those graduate, our cohorts kind of level out to 115, 120, which is what we're seeing at the elementary level. Back in 2000 and 2005, we were seeing cohorts as high as 180, 190. There was a cohort of over 200 at one point. So we're sort of normalizing. We're going to see that in the next 5 years or so, more normalized. So if you go to the next slide, also just thought this was interesting looking at back in 2000, for example, Bridport had 7th and 8th grade as well, but there was once, almost 130 students in that building. If you go down for, 700 students at the high school. So just sort of thinking about space and capacity and, being 2,200 or about 562 students lighter than we were some years ago. And then the next slide just brings us back to sort of our current reality. We're at 1,606 K-12 this year, and we'll actually see a slight increase next year that's projected 1,620 because we're graduating a relatively small, smaller than average cohort in the 12th grade. Peter, do you have?
So what you're saying is that's a little bit short-lived because
Yeah,
the
it's
11th
short-lived.
grades and 10th grades are both large cohorts.
Correct, yeah.
And that's why the 25, 26 is when we feel like, as we've been saying, that kind of 115, 120 per grade is fairly consistent, interestingly, right now across elementary schools. And what's interesting, if you look at the numbers year by year, is it's it's not like schools are staying absolutely steady at one number. The number can go, Salisbury, for example, was 105, I think, and
Yep,
now
2
they're
years
down
ago.
to in the 80s. So that shift, just kind of as population changes and folks move, but that consistent 115 is, where we think we'll land eventually, and that's where that number will be in the 1500s, when we finally are hopefully stabilized, and then hopefully, at some point going up.
Yeah, and also I wanted to note that the FY22 projection shows the 6th grade move to mums, so you can see obviously, plus 99, that's obviously not just all new students to the district. So you can see the reductions in the elementary schools in part because of 6th grade move, and then sometimes it's just a matter of incoming K being projected at a little smaller. So you can see at mums it'll be close to 360, and then you can see what we think elementary schools will look like without 6th grade. That's just something interesting to take note of as well.
Chip?
When over the years, or at least the recent years, talking about facilities and whatever, we've been criticized by some folks that say that we're not finding the data in the right places or whatever. But it would seem, even though we can track it, we know how many kindergartners there are, we know what there is, and from what the birth rate is, from what the population of the county is, which is really the population of this county. I've been here 45 years, has not changed radically up. And if you take in all of those things with people having fewer children, which they absolutely are per family, unless there's some huge change in the county, which provides housing and provides jobs, our population is not going to change a lot.
Getting older, that's how it's changing.
Yeah, well, it's getting older, but it's not changing from a point of view of numbers per se. And so it may be the case that certain schools, be they Shoreham or Salisbury or whatever, will see these ups and downs. And it may be perfectly reasonable, the comment about, why Shoreham may have a slight blip up. Those are not necessarily long-term. And that's where I think we have to be very clear that the data speaks for itself. And unless something changes, which I don't see, unless Amazon puts a center in Cornwall and builds thousands of houses somewhere, that it's going to change. So,
Jen?
I have one thing to add, just because it kind of hit home this year as a parent at the Salisbury school, because we had larger enrollments. We're kind of thinking, oh yeah, we're good. We're in the hundreds year after year. And as we all know, it went down to in the 80s this year. So we lost a teacher. And that was really hard. It was really hard for the school to have to deal with a longtime teacher who my son says was his favorite teacher and wanted her to read about him as a 6th grader at the 6th grade graduation. And it's kind of traumatic. And she didn't lose a job. She went to a different school, but it's still traumatic and disruptive. And we're going to have those blips. We're going to have those blips at all of our schools. And I think what's getting lost, maybe people don't think that we know about that or care about the teachers behind this, but we really do. And what I would argue for is if we can have a bit of a buffer within our schools, then if we have a blip of 10 or 12 students, then that doesn't mean that a teacher's whole career has to be disrupted and relocated or laid off. So I see what we're doing as a way to help our educators have that stability and prevent what I saw this year was a really unfortunate situation.
Other comments or questions for Brittany or Peter?
Just the plus 99, for the change, seems like it's a particularly smaller cohort than the 115 that we keep talking about.
Well, it's a combination of
it's
a
not
larger
just
8th grade class and an incoming, incoming sixth grade.
Okay.
And then also in
Good,
seventh
sorry.
grade, we start to see some tuition kids come in from Hancock and Granville, so.
Okay. That makes sense.
Other questions? Great, well, thank you. I think it helps to,
So I thought we were just a question about this, or if you're moving on to a different topic, I do have just one more question.
Go ahead.
And I'm always curious to know the enrollment of the tuition students from the White River Valley at both Ripton, Mums High School, or Mary Hogan, if they happen to go to Mary Hogan.
Yep, we have around, well, in the low 30s.
So
Yeah.
give a breakdown as to where they are. How many-
In, like, at which school or
Yeah.
from where?
No, at which school?
I can get you that. I don't know it off the top of my head. They're primarily at Ripton, for elementary,
Right.
and then Moms and MUHS, obviously.
Yeah.
We typically have, one at Cornwall, I think, and then we have, usually have like 3 or 4 at Mary Hogan.
And
I
then-
believe
and
that the
number-
numbers, the numbers though, if you look at, I think historically, we have the most students. The elementary numbers, the percentage of the total is lower than the percentage of the total from Mums and MUHS. So some stay in that region for elementary and then come over for middle and high.
Well, I think it's the end, there's no more middle school or high school in Rochester, but they remain to have a K-6 program.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
We actually have 37 tuition students.
Yeah. And we have, I believe it's under 10 at Ripton. I don't know exactly off the top of my head right now, but yeah.
It's single digits.
great. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you for pulling this together. It's super helpful to have a consistent baseline of data to be working from. Next up on the agenda is report of the board, and a discussion of the facilities master plan and where we are to date. So there's kind of 2 buckets of content that we thought we would go over, kind of where we are to date, next steps. And also start really having a discussion and using some of the themes that have emerged, and that we've been discussing as well, not just new themes, that were driven by the porch conversations. And so we put together a PowerPoint deck just to kind of help us walk through all that. And then hopefully we'll have our own little porch conversation right here. So Victoria, you want to get started? Should we get started with that first? Or do you want to do like timeline?
Well, I think we can work timeline into the conversation.
Okay,
So why don't we just start with, I mean, basically these slides come from, we've now done, I don't even know how many, a lot. There you go. We've done a number of these porch conversations, and Mary and I have talked about how to best sort of synthesize what we've learned, and also sort of bring you guys up to speed on what we're hearing from the community and how that's driving our thinking and that sort of thing. So
Just 1 second while we get this shared content.
I know you don't know right off the top of your head how many, but generally, how many?
well, we've had 2.
Yeah, there's a,
We've had 2 everywhere except for Bridgeport and Salisbury.
hit it. So they are, how many?
Okay,
There you go.
thank you, sorry.
So as you can see, we've been to each town. We have one scheduled in Bridgeport and Salisbury coming up. Although a little plug for Bridgeport and Salisbury, if you haven't signed up, don't hold back. Sign up now. If we don't,
Reports tomorrow.
yeah, Bridgeport's tomorrow, Salisbury is next week.
Monday.
Monday. So if we don't have numbers there, we may consolidate and have it be a Bridgebury meeting. So generally what we've seen is that we've gotten a pretty good mix of parents, community members, some staff, and generally concerned citizens, all in, we estimate we've seen about 145 folks. And
I think some of them have had a mix of residents from different towns, and some have been primarily from that town. So we've experienced both those makeups at all of the conversations. Next slide, please. I think there were some very consistent community concerns that were expressed during these meetings, and we also, I think, have heard them at some of the public comments. And we kind of characterize them in statements that we're hearing and questions that have been asked. The first one is around this concept of why would folks choose to live in our town if we no longer have an elementary school? And that statement means a lot more, obviously, than just that. It's the concern that the elementary school is a critical component of the essence of these towns. And there is significant concern on some folks' part that without that elementary school in that town, it just completely changes the dynamic of the town. It changes the reason why someone would live there, or the likelihood that someone would live there. It makes the experience for that child that lives in that town now, rather than just being able to go fill in the blank from a distance perspective, having to go to someone else's school, which is, we heard that a lot, that language of this idea of going to someone else's school. And so it was palpable in, I would say, all these conversations.
absolutely.
This next one has been a very interesting theme, in that this plan that we're all talking about, basically what it just means is larger class sizes, and that's a bad plan. And it's a bad plan because that's not what my current experience feels like. And there's no way that you can help. I have a hard time understanding how 20 kids in a classroom is better than 13 kids in a classroom. And so I very much I'm struggling with how to support a plan that is going to be creating a worse experience for my kids. And we heard that consistently, I think, and iterations on all of this, but thematically, I think this is fairly.
Yeah, and generally when that would come up, sort of we talk about that in our schools, 20 or 17 to 20, is not a terribly unusual number, but that the big difference is that we're looking at class sizes of one cohort and not mixed grade. And some people just really value the mixed grade experience, and have a hard time, as Mary said, understanding how a new model that has a single grade with 20 kids could meet their expectations.
This next one, it's really interesting to have these conversations and go through this process of, I'm not hearing how this is going to be better. I'm just hearing this is not good, and that this is taking away, right? And this understanding of taking away in people's minds gets there's a connotation to it that if you're taking away something, then I have less, and having less is not as good as having more. And so there's this need to understand, at the end of the day, why is this good for our kids? And putting real language and helping folks get there from a level of understanding. And I think William spoke to that today to us as well, like, help me understand how this is good for our kids, and I'm on board. And so that has been, I think, reflected in the conversation.
And I think when we've had the opportunity to sort of elaborate on the vision and, you know, and I guess quell the fears that we're trying to create these big urban schools, people, they like to hear that, and they say, that's what I need to hear. That's what I can get behind and get excited about. And so some people are ready to embrace that and go with it and start trying to envision how are we gonna come together as a community to create these new learning communities. And other people aren't there at all. You don't wanna hear about it.
And then this last one, I would argue we've heard this almost at every porch conversation with regards to research. And, folks have put a lot of time into this, and they put a lot of time into thinking about the question and understanding different issues, et cetera. And so they want to know what's driving our thinking, like what's behind where we're going, why are we going where we're going? And is there research that's helping you support those decisions? Or why are we making decisions that we are making? And like, what is that those underlying principles to help us through that? And so I think it's been important for us, I think, to hear that, because it's help me understand the map, and I'm more likely to go on the journey with you. And so that's something that we consistently have heard.
Right, it's sort of, there's definitely this tension between the financial and the educational piece. And it's sort of, if we start talking about the finance piece, then everybody says, well, what about the educational? But if we start talking about the educational piece, then they say, well, what about the finance piece? So it's just this things.
Yeah. Which leads us to the next slide, which is just a fantastic segue. Unbelievable. This is and now I think this is like, these are the things that we've been noodling on. And, you get in the car after one of these porch conversations and you're just like, whoosh, and your mind is spinning a lot and thinking a lot. And so we wanted to kind of introduce or chat about some of these thoughts as well here as a full board. And we think one of the key takeaways from this, and it might seem obvious, but this is really, and the way that we think about it and the way that we're working through this is such an interconnected issue. You can't talk about finance without talking about education. And you can't talk about education without talking about finance. And there's staffing issues, and there's enrollment dynamics, and there's macroeconomic dynamics, and there's the infrastructure footprint that we have. And one of these alone is not what's driving this. It's that you put all this stuff in a pot, and now we have a situation. And so I think that the more we think about this as this interconnected fabric that we're trying to address, as opposed to one issue, I think it serves us better as we're thinking about this issue.
I'd say I've started most of the porch conversations talking about how the work of the board comes in two pods, and one is the strategic planning pod and making strategic choices, and the other is reacting to cost and taxes and the threshold and all these other things, and that really we see the facilities master plan as the coming together of both those things. And so within that plan, we need to be, really certain to both make the argument as to why financially we need to do it, but also expound on what's going to be different and what's going to be better in terms of the educational impact.
Next slide, please. this is where, we talked a little bit about the plan itself and the interdependent nature of finance and education. And we can't lose sight and have to figure out, I think, in the plan itself and as we're continuing our thinking of, while it seems like all we've been talking about is budgets and square footage and doorknobs and all that stuff, we have to continue to articulate the educational integration and educational benefits from this work, and that's what's driving this work at the end of the day. And so that strong financial footprint allows us to do the things from an educational perspective that should be at the forefront. And then the other component of this, which we can't forget, is that people, this is a K-12 plan. And that we need to be, all of us, our community members, everyone needs to be thoughtful about the fact that you choose a district, not a school. And so as we're thinking through this and the language and work that we put towards it, we have to be thinking about that. Helping our folks, helping all of us remember that we choose a district, not a school. And there is significant work that needs to be done in order for us to have a foundation that supports not just our elementary schools, but our K-12.
And I would say of the folks who attended these, the majority, I'd say the vast majority of parents who were represented were parents of elementary school students. And so within that group, there was a lot of question about, okay, if you're making these cuts at the elementary level, we better be seeing it at MUMS and MUHS too. How are you going to be balancing the cuts? And, obviously the 6th grade move is a big part of that. But we also remind them that all of our students are going to MUMS and MUHS, and that when you have a school the size of MUHS, it's easier to right size, on a year-to-year than it is when you have a high school.
Next slide, please. And this one has really been, I think, at least I think it's been paramount in my head, this whole idea that these must be new learning communities, just not schools with new kids going there. And that really requires incredible, purposeful implementation planning for whatever this ends up looking like. It should be driving us and ensuring that we have the opportunity to create a greater diversity to our learning communities than we currently have. And how do we think about that? And how much of a priority is that as we move forward? And these are not, to Victoria's point, like, it's not that we're creating these large, extremely large learning institutions. We're talking about one grade, one cohort in each of the elementary schools except for Mary Hogan. And that seems like an appropriate type of foundation to be serving the numbers that we have. And the other piece is that has been not tricky, but has been an interesting discussion is, we have, when you look at numbers and just talk about total staff positions and what this means from a plan perspective, it could send one message. But when you really start talking about why that staffing model is the way it is with regards to certified positions, that's a different conversation. And that has, there's great value to that conversation. And so, we really have learned, I think, being able to talk about that and having Peter there to talk about that, and the more that we can get that message out has been valuable, I think, in this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just say that that my hope is that once we have finished the plan, that then it'll be the moment for really careful and systematic coming together of all parties to figure out like what are the traditions that we want to bring forward and what are new traditions we want to bring together, and that we're going to have to do some really careful planning around making sure these aren't just, you know, the Cornwall school with added kids or the Bridgeport school with added kids or whatnot. That they are truly new, unique learning environments for communities.
Next slide, please. And so then these were also some themes that we, like clarifications or misunderstandings or opportunities for discussions. And these were really consistent in all of the porch conversations. This doing, or I should have done a better job in the language that we used around enrollment, it seems, is stabilizing. It has decreased clearly, as we have seen on the chart. But the point that's important in that stabilization is that even if it's stabilizing, and we chatted with folks about, that's great that it's stabilizing. It really is great that it's stabilizing. But the costs are continuing to rise at a greater rate than per pupil allocation of funds. And so those two things don't match. And so let's just all agree that it's stabilizing, and let's also agree then that that still presents us with a sticky wicket. And that's really, I think, something that we've struggled.
Yeah, I think that I mean, just your average person doesn't think about the fact that if you have 160 kids graduating in 12th grade and you only have 110 coming in kindergarten, that there's big impact. You know, I certainly wouldn't have thought of it like that, but and so as Mary said, yeah, if we're stabilizing, that's great, but there's still tiny schools.
And I think because of that previous slide, you know, transportation is really a critical component of this plan. It really is. In making sure that the catchment areas that are created do the things that we're hoping this plan can do in ways that our community also can get behind. And so how we think about the role of transportation, what are the breaking points where we say, okay, this isn't working the way out, we're working out the way we want it to be working out. Like we're gonna have to be flexible in our thinking there, because it is an incredibly important component of making this plan work. This whole idea of class sizes becoming consistent, but not become ineffective, right? Like, how do we bring consistency to a class size experience across the district? And by doing that, doesn't mean that all of a sudden 20 kids, that's an ineffective class size number, because we've demonstrated in the district that it's not. And so that's been, I think it's one of our challenges in the conversation. And then again, this idea of implementation for this is hard work, really hard work. And so that is going to be, it's going to be a big lift, and it's going to take time and great planning to do. And at the end of the day, you know, we would try to get to this place in the porch conversations of the content on the right that you see there. Our footprint is oversized for the number of kids we're serving. We don't see a huge growth in students in the foreseeable future, so that's not changing, that our footprint is oversized. And as a result of these other financial pressures, that means that our resources are thinning over this footprint that's too big. And so we're going to continue to see this increase in costs despite this stabilization of enrollment. And so with that thinning, we are really starting, you know, we have to think about the fact that we're becoming less effective when it's getting so thin. And that really has been the type of message that we've tried to communicate. So that's kind of where we are from all this stuff, all these conversations. Love to get your questions or thoughts or concerns,
Things you're hearing,
whatever, as we're working through this.
Peter.
I'm happy to kick things off. In some ways, it's a complex issue. I would say in other ways, it's not. I mean, the fact is it seems increasingly like, and this has been going on for years, but every year, what we come to it at budget time is, okay, how can we, or what we end up doing is cutting opportunities and raising taxes. That's not a fun way to be a board member, but because of the challenges that we face financially, that's what we're stuck with every year. What's complex is how we address that. And we could address, we could let the crisis build and build and build, and then the decisions would be forced upon us, and we would just be always operating from how do we stem the bleeding? How do we, keep taxes from going up too much without cutting too many opportunities for kids? And what we're trying to do here, it seems to me, is to address this in a very strategic, a very intentional way by bringing in lots of different factors so that when it comes to the budget time, we don't have to constantly think in terms of how are we cutting services and raising taxes, because that does not make for a fun board experience. So, I think you've just really done an excellent job of framing this as, while I see the problem is somewhat simple from a board member point of view. I'm tired of cutting services and raising taxes. It's the solution that's complex, but can also be very exciting. And if we don't sort of get there, we're just gonna have the same fun we've been having for the past 30 years of yearly tax increases and depressing conversations about what are we going to cut this year. And I just think that the intentionality and the strategic nature in which we're trying to do this in the best way possible, I think is something that we need to talk about more. And I think that the way you have got these sort of summarized in these slides is something we all need to take to heart as to how we're moving forward with this.
Thank you. Other comments, questions, thoughts? Chip?
I think thanks, your elaborating on the slides was very helpful. I wish we could put that into a little better compact, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I've been here the whole time listening over the years, but in fact, I thought that was the slides themselves don't say it all. So maybe you should compose what you just said, okay, in a way that will help those slides. As I've gone along through this and hearing it from all sides, and obviously hearing it, in most cases, the negatives come from the small schools who are threatened, okay, from their culture and everything else. We don't hear a lot from other parts of the community, but the greater district community. But the equity issue, to me, it's not just, it is really key, all right? And we can define it in those different words that we've used over time, but equity itself also, I think the bigger the system, and we're not big, but the bigger it is, the less likely you're going to have some of these. The equity of years ago when there were 14 boys in Cornwall and no girls. Or other districts that have, 3 boys, 10 girls, and there's no peers for those 4 boys, 3 boys. Those are part of equity too. It isn't just the size of the class or how the services that children in need more than other places. It's the fact that you can't deal with those issues. If you're a small school and that's your class, that's your class. And so some of those kids in those classes are not going to enjoy that experience. They aren't. And they get through it and they get to the next level. But I think that to me is a part of an equity also. It's a much bigger picture to me than just providing services to everybody to reach their potential. It's the smaller the number, you can't control these changes not just in gender, but in the types of kids, and a socioeconomic balance. We may want to ignore that, but that's a big issue in this district. Always has been in different towns. Probably worse now than it was 30 or 40 years ago. But not that we're going to change it completely, but I think that's part of the equity of what children experience when they're going to school. You know, so.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Right?
I've also heard a little bit about the smaller schools or schools having the idea that fundraising will somehow, help to keep, the schools afloat. Could you possibly speak to that and how maybe that is not sustainable? Like, whereas it's good, it may not necessarily address larger issues here.
So there's two types from a fundraising perspective, so just to make sure we'll answer to clarify. There's the fundraising for non-essential service, well, not non-essential, but there's fundraising for non-staff expenditures. Is that what you're speaking to?
Generally,
Okay.
for
Want
For non-staff or staff?
No, explain the staff component.
Okay, so we can't, by law, we can't take donations to support positions in our school. So Act 60 and Act 68, the Brigham decision, essentially is working the law works to equalize spending. It doesn't do it completely, and there are issues with it. But one of the things within that is that a community couldn't say, well, we're going to now, tax our citizens and we're going to put that money to sustain a school. They're not able by law to do that.
or even to raise funds and say, we're going to endow a science specialist for Mary Hogan or something. You couldn't raise funds privately to pay for something that's in the budget.
And since what we're trying to address are macro financial issues, not I need, uniforms or a new playground or like macro issues, the fundraising component is not even on the table because it's illegal.
And I'm just bringing that up because it came up earlier in one of the public comments, but I also heard it somewhere else. So just so they can understand.
Perfect, thank you. Other thoughts, questions, Jen?
I have so many thoughts going through. It's really helpful to I feel like we're ready to sort of move to a next step, right? So I have a couple of things. The first is the PR. So your 4 main themes that came up, would it be possible to connect offline to come up with some kind of answer for those to put on the website? Do you agree that would be
Yes, I was thinking
a good way to sort of address those main topics? The second thing, I'm just kind of excited, right? So I'm excited about the good things, about what this will look like, and we're almost there, right? And so it's such a hard time where people are like, well, why are you asking us to buy into something when we don't know what it looks like? We can't explain what it looks like until we've sort of gotten past a point where we say, this is going to work, and these are the schools, and this is the transportation, and now here's the structure. And so I feel like we're almost there, and I'm really excited to get to that next phase where we can really start designing it. And what makes me the most excited about it is that 6th grade presentation, because that was the unknown, right? And it doesn't feel like from their presentation that the 6th graders are going to be just shoved into the middle school, and that it's going to be, the 6th graders visiting somebody else's school, like you're saying. It seems like it's going to be a new integrated educational experience for all of the middle schoolers. And I'm excited that I will have a child experiencing that, and I'll be able to see what it's like firsthand. And I'm hoping that once we get past these sort of transitional points right now, that we can talk about our elementary school model in a similar way, where we're excited about it and can express why this is going to be so great for people. And I had a third point, but I forgot it already. So I'm sure it'll come back at some point, or maybe it wasn't that important. But thank you very much for putting that all together. It's really,
And just one point on the communication part to you as well, Chip. This deck, Victoria and I worked on, and it is a derivative of a letter to the editor that I will be submitting. And I'm submitting it over my name, so it is from my perspective, because I do not in any way want to imply that I'm speaking for the board, you as members. But you can kind of get a sense, and I will send that letter out to you all prior to sending it to the paper. So there's a lot more language in the letter to the editor, Chip, than what is here.
That's fine, but the letter, and just to be clear,
Yep.
unless we are sort of designating you to write that letter, this is a letter that you will explain is from you
Exactly.
personally, okay? Not that I care, because I agree, but on the other side, some folks won't.
Completely agree. Other questions, comments?
I have a comment about, similar to what other people have said regarding families being uncertain of what's out there. And they're very secure in the small communities and the amount of support they get in their own individual communities right now. And it's the fear of the unknown. They don't know if they're going to have that in the next iteration of school. But having worked with kids for so long, I see that when children have an opportunity for something novel and new in terms of friends, as Chip said, this opportunity to have new friends, or a diverse group of friends, or something new and different, it's exciting for them. It can be, as long as their parents are enthusiastic about it as well. But if the parents are like, oh, this is going to be terrible, I'm so fearful, I don't know what's going to happen when you go out, that's going to be detrimental. So I just wonder if we shouldn't have some discussion about child development and how new, diverse opportunities and things that are new and exciting are actually something that can excite kids about going to school, instead of seeing the same old all the time. So I think the more people, the more opportunities, the more, like I say, novel experiences kids get, the more exciting things are. We don't want stressful things, obviously, but just, just opening up their eyes to all the different things that are out there. But I have grandchildren who are in a small school, and it is very difficult because they have only one or two friends. And when that one friend leaves, they're out of luck. Sure. So I see their tears about not having good friends. And once they get into a bigger school like the high school, it's like, wow, going to school is great all of a sudden, right? So I think this is something that families need to sort of contemplate, that it isn't just the fear of something new for the parents, because they're very secure. It's the opportunity for their kids and looking at it as a benefit instead of you're taking away. So.
How about some feedback from our students on the board? What do you all think? Sir?
Thank you. Yeah, I think what Mary Gill pointed out was very important. I think that, invest in our children, invest in our students, invest in 30 years from now, what that looks like. And I think that's important as well. I think it's clearly a very time-committed process. It's a process that we've been in for quite a long time, it appears. I think, again, there's continues to be that kind of culture part of it, where if have been in a community or you've been in a setting that has been doing things apparently well, and it has been working well to some extent, and having this new culture, this new shift come and say what has been happening has been great, but having this new way of looking at things, as Mary pointed out, where it's an opportunity to really expand the knowledge of those students with this kind of next generational change and transformation. So, thank you.
I think that the parents are definitely much more worried about it than the kids are. I think that as a student, I would be excited to, as you said, have new friends, meet new people. I think that the stress is only really related to how the parents are worried about what their kids are going to think, and not really. I don't think any kid is really that worried about the facilities master plan. It's not crossing their mind. And I think that when their parents say, hey, you're gonna go to the middle school next year, they'll be like, okay, that's great. And then after a few weeks in school, they'll be completely, that's normal for them now. So I think that it's important to realize that sometimes as a parent, things can seem much more important than they actually are to your student or your actually representative when you're talking about these issues.
Any other, Peter?
One, great to hear from you guys. That's an excellent observation. Thank you very much. Two, like Jen, at our last meeting, listening to the 6th grade presentation, this is a major change and a disruption in a younger cohort of kids. And I couldn't help but think, wow, this is really going to be a great program. This is really what we wanted it to be, where it's somewhat, the opportunity was created because of declining enrollment, and it's going to help financially, but it is also, I believe, a real step forward in equity and educational quality and opportunity. And the facilities master plan is sort of a bigger version of that, but it just goes to show that the financial and the educational can go hand in hand down the same path and be better for everybody. The third thing I just want to say is that a lot of responsibility has been sort of thrust upon the facilities committee. You've got big topics that you've chosen to have ahead of you, and I just would suggest laying out a process where the committee sort of takes a topic to a certain point, and then it's got to come to the full board to debate and discuss, and not feel like it has to rest on the committee to take it 100% there, because it's a lot.
Other comments, questions, or
Yeah,
concerns?
folks on Zoom too. Who might
I had a
want to-
question here on Zoom.
Hey, Jordan.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So as we move on then to this next step of the transportation study, the question I have is, considering our goal of maximizing diversity at each school, which we've stated as an intention, given the considerations that have been made for the current state of the facilities that we have, as well as their capacity, and thirdly, our expressed desire to limit bus rides to an hour, I'm wondering how, as a board, we prioritize also the heat map and population density when we think about how many students will have an hour bus ride. Is having 20 students who have an hour bus ride the same as having 60 or 70 students with an hour bus ride? And I'm just wanting to ask that now as we, move ahead with the transportation study, and maybe Brittany, or I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that yet, but that's certainly a question that I've been weighing.
Great point.
Yeah, Jory, I've thought the same thing, and when I'm hoping to meet with the transportation consultant in the next week or so, and one of the questions that I have, and actually maybe Brittany knows the answer to this, is we say, the max travel time won't be more than 6, when we looked at the 3 school model, wouldn't increase by more than 6 minutes or whatever. But I think it's an important question to ask, is that the max travel time for that one kid who's already traveling an hour, or is it now 50% of our students are going to be traveling more than an hour? I think that's absolutely something we need to look at when we dive into the transportation stuff.
And they're different, just to add to kind of what you're saying. So as we work with the consultant, the next level that we'll be looking at, and he'll be coming to the next facilities committee meeting in November. The next level is going to be looking at kind of catchment areas, looking at some of the issues we've seen in terms of travel times and distance, and looking at that socioeconomic diversity that we've talked about to really start to map that across. We won't get to the level in November, I don't think, of individual students, which is kind of the heat map, Jory, that you're talking about. I think that will probably be coming later in December, in terms of once we have a general understanding, because to be able to map that, we first have to decide, okay, roughly this is a catchment area that we want to see. What does that look like at the more micro level as opposed to macro? So that certainly will be kind of part of the process of looking at, the time, and some of that can be solved. I know in conversations with the consultant up to this point, and in looking at 3-school model and looking at 4-school model, adding buses, you can add a bus, move things around, add one bus, and that can impact a lot of students in terms of ride time, and it could take down, for more than a bus full of students, it can take down everybody's ride time by 10 minutes or something. So that's part of this equation too, is the number of buses that we employ. And as Mary mentioned so eloquently, it's very complex.
Can you speak to the legality of having to provide transportation for everybody?
I mean, legally, we're not required to. Many states require school districts to provide transportation. Vermont does not. However, I don't know of any district that's not providing transportation.
There are some.
Are there?
Yeah, Proctor is a town, but it's a small town, everything's sort of like walkable.
Okay.
There are a handful, but it's not common.
Yeah.
Right.
It becomes a huge equity issue, I think.
I totally understand that,
Yeah.
but it's still a huge cost. And
It's a huge cost, yeah.
Extremely complicated,
Yeah.
especially in areas. I mean, like New York City, obviously they take the subway, right? They don't provide, I understand it's a different place, there's public transportation, there's all of that.
Yeah.
But in fact, if they had to provide transportation to every student in the New York City
Yeah, well, a
district,
lot
it
of
would
places
probably
will
be
give a
unbearable.
student a pass. They have partnerships. A lot of urban areas have partnerships with local transportation, and you just get a bus pass or a metro pass, and
So
they
as soon
don't.
as we have a subway, we are
Yeah,
good
so
to
we're.
go. Right.
Let me just also, just as a little detail to add to that, which is, I mean, for example, I lived in a part of Ripon where the bus didn't, we were 1.2 miles away from the closest bus stop. So just because we provide transportation does not mean we stop at every house and serve every student, nor should, I mean, I think that's been that way for years. It's perfectly reasonable for us to, it's that equation of what's manageable as a route versus the number of students that take you that far out. Anyway, just making that point.
This is just logistical, but do they talk about using different size fleets? I mean, like a smaller bus for remote people that are, maybe 10 or 15 minutes down this road, but there's just a few of them, instead of adding them onto a large route, just to minimize the travel time? Like a 6-passenger, an 8-passenger bus.
That hasn't been part of our
Just to reduce
conversation.
the amount of time.
The cost probably isn't gonna be like markedly different because you're paying for the driver.
Yeah, I know. The
Largely.
driver.
I mean, I certainly creative solutions like that are on the table. I'm not sure that it's gonna be material to our discussion in terms of like analyzing a 3 or a 4-school model against our current state.
Yeah. Well, part of the reason I brought that up too is that in the most rural parts, and you brought it up about that, there may be these pockets that change. It may be that the bus changes completely because there's 2 or 3 families that decide they're going to drive their kids to school. It happens in Middlebury all the time, okay? Kids don't walk anymore like they did 40 years ago. To school, I mean, even at the very young age. So that's why we have the traffic backed up at Mary Hogan, because there's so many families that are bringing their children and dropping them off, that's the convenient, or they feel that that's best for their kid, or it works for them, or all of these different factors. So it's the equity part of providing it is a little different than saying it all has to be equal, because it's never going to be that way. Families will decide themselves. And I'm sure now with COVID, there's less on the bus.
Oh, yeah.
Jen? Last in the weeds question about busing. Is going to every house seems just so much to me. I grew up in a city where you could walk up to about a mile or a mile and a half to a bus stop, but we had sidewalks. So can you clarify, is there some ruling why we can't have bus stops because we don't have very many sidewalks, or is that just in my head why we don't have bus stops and go to every house?
So that's developed over time. There's not a requirement that, we have any kind of spacing on bus stops or we stop at every house. I think once you develop a culture of stopping at every house, then it's harder to go back to a bus stop kind of approach. I mean, that is one of the things that I think the board, as we look at transportation overall, and you're talking about ride times, you obviously cut down, right, a lot on ride times if you're not stopping, 5 times on this road, you're stopping 2 or 3.
Well, and buses have to turn around in weird places to get to like one house. So if they're like at the
Including the person
intersection,
in the back of the bus.
and then the people that are
Yeah.
within a half mile walk down that
Oh, yeah.
intersection, then you're saying, I think it's dangerous too. I think that the bus does a 3-point turn in an intersection in front of my house every day. And I'm just like, no, nobody comes crashing down. I'm just afraid like they're gonna get an accident every single day, where they could be down in the village part and we could walk or ride a bike or a drop off at, a half a mile down the road. I think it could cut down on the time and the safety aspect, but I just wasn't sure.
Right, it benefits students too. I mean, if they have a shorter bus ride. I mean, the balance there is, in the winter in Vermont, a first grader waiting on the side of the road, that's the real, I think, the real challenge for us in the bus stop piece. And we've had lots of conversations with families
Watch
over
out,
the
you're
years
gonna
about
start
this.
hearing us old timers
I
talking about
know,
what
I
was
was
one.
gonna say
Well, and I just like inevitable, I was just gonna say that we have a mix right now, of the way that, as Peter said, it's developed sort of organically. So some routes have more sort of group stops and some have more individual stops, and some people feel really strongly about their student, the bus stopping right in front of their house. So it's developed organically over time, but for sure, like one of the things that the board will be looking at is setting some sort of policy or procedure about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I think it's an opportunity to kind of relook at that. Yeah. Amy.
Well, and it does beg then the other question that people have been curious about, which is, so, if let's say a student is in the new district that's gonna be in Salisbury, but mom and dad wanna go, like they're going to Middlebury every day. So where are we on the choice conversation and how that fits into the whole picture?
I think it brings up a great point. And I mean, for me, I think it's one of the things that Peter referenced before, where this is a big issue that right now maybe the facilities plan has been putting more highlight to that, but it could be something that we as a board just take on and debate as a board.
Well, I think we did actually talk about it being just a board conversation as opposed to a facilities conversation. It's connected to the facilities committee conversation.
The choice question. you mean?
The school choice question, but bringing that to this group. I mean, that's part of the overall facilities master plan.
Right, I mean, we've been working on under the
November.
assumption that once we get the report from the transportation consultant, then we'll talk about the idea of choice and, how that would look, what the different various models would be. I mean, that's the assumption we've been going under.
My recollection,
But
it was the
certainly-
second meeting in November was when we had it slated for.
The board, second meeting in
Yeah.
November, board
Yeah.
meeting, we have
Oh,
no
okay.
choice.
Yeah.
I just had one question that I'd love to get everybody's temperature on, because it's come up, not at every porch conversation, but a few, and Will spoke to it today. There are certain people who have said, well, why don't you just, this community's always passed the budget and has always been supportive of the schools. Well, you haven't asked us if we would just pay more taxes. I'm not gonna say what my feeling is. I'm gonna just put it out there, what you're feeling. How would you react to that? Where do you think the board should
Well,
stand?
It's a big topic that we probably can't address tonight without a little ability to think about it on our own. It's not a bad idea to put it on an agenda later. But it's a big, challenging topic. We've sort of used a state-imposed litmus test, believing that was sort of the responsible limit to which we should be paying cost per pupil. And I think that it has worked. I think, the challenge of leadership is coming up with a plan and executing it and hoping you made the right decision. And I think we have a responsibility, not just a responsibility to everybody. And I think that we get a sense statewide as to what is a responsible amount of money to pay per pupil, based on, essentially what everybody else is paying in a state that is already at the top or near the top of per pupil spending in the country. So I guess to not just have a big debate about it, but to just say, it's a hard question because we need to be responsible to all people, not just those who are benefiting from the fantastic education we provide.
Right.
Amy?
The other piece is, there's that part of the important conversation in terms of the finances, and well, sure, we could just tax ourselves and continue to do it. But that does not address this opportunity to really look wholesale at equity in our district and to design a system that lets us get at it in a really intentional, thoughtful, and I think we're all thinking exciting way. We need to do a better job of articulating that, but so raising taxes is not going to let us get at what we really envision as possible with this plan.
Yeah, which is why I do, there is complexity even to the problem, right? Because it's not just a funding thing.
Right.
Any other comments, questions?
I guess I would just add that I could see that argument if we had full schools that seemed like they were all running in an equitable, overly performing way. And I don't think we have that. I don't think what any of us think right now is that we have the perfect school system and we want to keep it. I think what we're all seeing is there's opportunity to I guess I would use to use those macroeconomics and use some economies of scale to trim down some excess expenses to be able to provide a more equitable education that is more sustainable. So I feel like if we do that and we still, are come running up to the limit, then that's when we have that conversation. And maybe be able to have a conversation at the state level and say, guess what? This threshold isn't going fast enough for all of us who are doing everything we can to contain expenses. But unless we've made some steps to contain expenses, I don't know that we can say that we've done everything we could.
Any other comments or questions? Anyone online? All good? Betty?
So you did mention that obviously a vision for a great education does rely on a solid, strong financial foundation. And in the study of the 3 or 4 school model, versus what we currently have. I wonder if you've had any, community members asking the question of how is the smaller model, is it gonna be more expensive, short term to bring those 3 or 4 schools up to the standard, the good learning environment that we're envisioning, compared to, like, how have you talked about the budget around those 2 models and how to show people that it's actually going to be less costly.
We haven't
I don't know if that makes.
We haven't shown a difference in budgets at the porch conversations or broadly between the 3 and 4 school model. I mean, clearly, in a 3 school model, there's less staff. You have greater economies of scale there. And so there is a difference. And yet, we continue to kind of work through this and have to weigh all these other factors of, are we checking off the box of including and making sure that from a transportation perspective, we're able to establish these diverse learning communities? Are we thinking about this plan in a way that allows our communities to carry it and get excited about it? And do you think about it from a phase perspective? Like all these other pieces of it, I think are still in the process of understanding, and I think the transportation study will be a big component of driving that understanding. But there has not been a specific 3 school or 4 school model that we've discussed specifically at Porch Conversation.
No, not at Porch Conversation.
Any other questions? Yes, Amy.
The other thing that I know is it's the macro that hasn't really, it's just too much to cover it in the porch conversations, but which is the whole state level, both in terms of budget, in terms of control. I mean, the one I was at last week, you guys were yelled at for just not cutting healthcare.
Talking to me.
No, I know. That to
Yeah,
us,
should have gone to him.
yeah, right, exactly. Just don't, and it's like, well, it's not, it's like, you just couldn't go there in the time that you had, but and I'm not remembering that there's a lot of that on the FAQ. I mean, it's so complex.
Well, I think one of the great things that has come out of the porch conversations is an understanding by those who are in attendance that a lot of this is beyond our control. Not only the situation that we're in, but sort of how our schools are funded and all of that. And so I think there has been, at least on those nights, enthusiasm by people to get more involved at the state level, to really understand, what's driving the way we fund our education and how can we make Vermont, a more affordable place for people to move to, and what about housing? And so there has been sort of a more macro conversation that goes on at pretty much everyone.
And Victoria does a great job of, I think, highlighting the opportunity, and it's been very informative to see those who are interested. Okay, well, thank you all for the discussion. Do you want to talk a little bit about next steps?
So the next facilities meeting is on November 18th, 4 to 6. We're going to have it here, but also via Zoom. And Peter, remind me, is Brittany reporting out on the transportation consultant, or is the transportation consultant?
He's coming on the 18th, yeah.
Will be presenting his.
I think he's coming virtually.
Right. Presenting his findings. So if anyone is free and available, you all will then hear our version of it at the next board meeting, but If you want to hear it from the horse's mouth, tune in to that meeting on the 18th.
Just a protocol question. Can non-committee members be in person? Or do you want to keep that limited? I don't know if that's a question too. I'm just curious.
Do you mean from a COVID perspective or from a?
I'm not sure. The last ones we've done virtually. I believe.
Right.
So
I thought we talked about having it in person.
this one in person.
Yeah, just.
Okay.
Doesn't need to be answered now, but maybe just shoot out an email saying, no,
Yeah.
we're gonna do it here and there's enough
Double
space for
check.
board members or something like that. Or there
Yeah.
isn't, and we're not.
I think we would have enough space, if we say the public is to zoom in. Right, yeah.
Well, that's our
So-
protocol for all
Yeah,
meetings.
that's all.
That's not, yeah.
So I would say, yes, you can come in person unless, if we find that you can't, I'll send an email. How about that?
All right, thank you all very much. Next up is an action item to adopt policy C12, prevention of sexual harassment as prohibited by Title IX. Mary.
Right, we warned it at our last meeting and had, Vicki gave a really good rendition of how difficult this particular policy is and that we have to adopt it as written by the Vermont State School Board, following their model policy. So we're presenting it for an adoption because we did talk about it 2 weeks ago.
Great, so I need a motion first.
I'll move with that.
Move it.
Oh, you got it?
Was that Suzanne?
Suzanne?
Yeah.
Dan moves to adopt it, second. Chip?
Yeah.
Chip, second. Any discussion?
It's too long to read. Vicki said I had to, and I couldn't just trust her, but I couldn't get through it, sorry.
It's a legal.
It's required, so.
It's totally
Great.
legal.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So adopted. Next up is an action to ratify the ACSD ACEA master agreement.
Okay, so those of you who have seen it in board pack, there are two documents. One is the tentative agreement, which is what we basically signed with the union. And it kind of sums up, the tentative agreement really sort of shows you what we dealt with versus everything else that's in the master agreement. We really only dealt with money. And that for two reasons. One, it was a 1-year contract, and two, really the master agreement with the teachers is a very mature document. A lot of the detail that's in there has been worked out over the years and is sort of at a point where it just sort of rolls over into each additional agreement. That may not be the case in the next go around, which will hopefully be a multi-year agreement. And so that's when maybe some things will be worked out more in the weeds. But really, this was a 3% new money deal in the end. And that's what was in front of us. We've signed off on it, and now we just need the official ratification of the board.
Could I have a motion to?
Well, I will move that we ratify the master agreement. That's proposed.
Second by Amy. Any other discussion or questions? All those in favor? Aye. Nays? So moved. Any other for other?
I just have one thing from the policy committee.
Yes.
We are planning on doing a 2-year cycle to look at board policy and make sure they're up to date. And the Vermont State, the school board, the Vermont State School Board has listed a number of policies that they have updated or that are currently new policies. So we'll be presenting those as we work through those. One of the things that came up at our discussion this afternoon was the procedure for the students on the school board. We just actually saw that it was listed on the board policy page. And there's some things that we feel are missing from that in terms of we wanted them, the students to have mentoring and more open opportunities for students, maybe who aren't always the top of their class or some of the best students. So I don't know if we have an opportunity to maybe discuss that at another time, Peter, with the policy group.
Sure, yeah.
Okay? And that's
I mean,
about it.
there's-
And we can see how valuable they are, so we really want to keep them engaged.
Yes.
I think that Mary said, I think it's important that it's inclusion, right? So I think we have a lot of inclusion in our school community. And I agree, I think making it more down the road, more accessible, or the opportunity there for all students is important. So, thank you.
That's all we have.
That's it. All for other? Wonderful. And so we have an executive session tonight, correct?
Yep.
Okay, super. So I
Won't
need,
be super long.
okay, good. Even more super. I need a motion to move us into executive session. Great.
And I'm gonna invite the board members on my own Zoom link, okay? So look in your email, I'll send you an email with the Zoom link.
Who moved that motion and seconded it, please?
I
moved it. Victoria.
Victoria moved it, and the second to go into executive session. Amy.
Amy?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
thank you. We are now in executive session.